I've been a truck driver for almost 18 years, driving mostly through rural Missouri and Arkansas. I've seen it all on this road: horrible accidents, hitchhikers in the most unlikely places, animals crossing the road out of nowhere, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what happened to me one early morning in October last year. I've never told anyone about it, except my wife, and even then she didn't really know what to say. Now, rereading some of the stories here on the forum, I think maybe someone else understands or has been through something similar. Or at least, I don't know, just telling me about it takes away some of the weight I've been carrying since that night. It was around 3 in the morning. I was on a common route, coming south from St. Louis towards Little Rock. The road was completely empty, only lit by the truck's headlights and, sometimes, by the weak light of a streetlight lost in the middle of nowhere. I was tired, but far from falling asleep at the wheel. I had stopped to have a strong coffee at a gas station about 40 minutes earlier. The sky was clear, with no sign of fog or rain. That's when I saw a figure on the side of the road. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a baby, because it looked small. But as I got closer, I realized it was a child. Alone. In the dark. She must have been 6 or 7 years old. She was standing right on the shoulder of the road, looking at the woods, with her back to the road. She was wearing a simple white dress, like a nightgown. Her hair was dark, and it looked like it was wet or stuck to her forehead. It was hard to tell. I slowed down without thinking twice. My immediate instinct was to help, of course. You don't expect to see a child in a place like that, especially at that time. I stopped the truck on the shoulder, a few meters ahead of her, turned on my hazard lights and got out quickly, my heart already racing. I called out to her, asked if she was okay, but she simply wouldn't move. She wouldn't turn. She just stood there, still, as if she hadn't even heard me. Then, when I got about 4 meters away from her, I swear by all that is sacred, she disappeared. She disappeared right in front of me. She didn't run, she didn't jump into the bushes, she didn't hide. She disappeared. It didn't make any sense. I stood there for a good few seconds, frozen. I looked around, up, at the ground, and tried to rationalize. She must have run really fast, or she must have played a trick on me, I thought. But there was nowhere to run. There was dense forest on both sides of the road, and the noise anyone would make stepping on that ground would be loud. And it was at that moment, while I was still trying to understand what had just happened, that I heard laughter coming from inside the truck's cabin. A childish laugh. At that moment, my body froze. The laughter didn't come from the road, it didn't come from the woods, it came from inside my truck. And it wasn't just any old giggle, like a sound of memory, some interference or something in my head. It was clear, sharp, like there was a child inside playing, mocking me. I stood on the shoulder, staring at the cabin door, feeling my stomach churn. It didn't make any sense. I was alone. I always travel alone. The key was in my pocket, the truck was off. I got in slowly, thinking that, I don't know, maybe the radio had turned on by mistake. But nothing was on. And the worst part, the smell. It had a strange smell, something that hadn't been there before. Half sweet, half sickening, like old cotton candy mixed with mold. I rummaged through everything inside, opened the compartments, even checked under the seat. Nothing. No children. No sign that anyone had been in there. I sat behind the wheel, took a deep breath, and tried to make sense of it. The road was completely empty. I looked in the rearview mirror and, I swear, for a second, I saw something pass between the taillights. Small, fast. The laughter came again. This time, louder. It wasn't just one laugh. There was more than one. There were 2, maybe 3 little voices laughing at the same time, as if they were playing hide-and-seek inside my cabin. The sound seemed to be coming from all sides, but there was no one there. My skin started to crawl all over. I don't know how long I stood still. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe less. I couldn't start the truck. My hand was shaking, and every time I reached for the key, something would stop me. It was as if my body was refusing to continue on that road. When I finally managed to turn the ignition, the radio turned on by itself, even though I had left it off before. A children's song started playing. One of those old ones, like a nursery rhyme. Only distorted, as if it were being played on a broken tape player. I turned off the radio in that same second, but the music continued to play for a few seconds before disappearing into thin air. I thought about turning around and going back to the station, but something told me it would be worse. That if I left there, something would go with me. I don't know how to explain it properly, it's just a feeling I had, like a warning inside my head. So I did what I could, I continued on my journey. Slowly, trying to ignore the noises. But it was no use. Every few minutes, I heard something. Laughter, light footsteps behind the bench, even sounds like someone was whispering in my ear. I even stopped twice to check, but I never found anything. Not a living soul on the road, no cars passing by, nothing. Just me, and the sound of children who shouldn't be there. When I finally reached a more urban area, where houses and streetlights began to appear, the sound stopped. It was like turning off a switch. No noise, no laughter, just the truck's engine and my heart racing. I stopped at a 24-hour gas station near Conway and stayed there in the cab for a few minutes, trying to understand what I had just experienced. I didn't have the courage to tell the attendant what had happened. I just ordered a strong coffee and went to the bathroom to wash my face. When I came back, a lady who was cleaning the floor looked at me strangely and asked if I was okay. I just nodded, but she insisted. She said that I looked really pale, like someone who had seen a ghost. I laughed awkwardly and said that it was just road fatigue. I tried to carry on with my life as normal after that, but I swear I could never drive at dawn again without getting tense. I started avoiding very isolated stretches and, whenever possible, I planned my routes to drive only during the day. That child, that moment when she disappeared. I relive it every time I close my eyes. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. I was sober, awake, alert. I saw. I heard. And I felt something inside that truck that shouldn't have been there. Something entered me that dawn, something that wasn't part of our world. One of the things that scares me the most to this day is remembering the song that played by itself on the radio. I tried to look it up later, even though I didn't know the melody very well. I searched for it, asked on forums, nothing. It was as if it didn't exist. It was something old, but at the same time out of place. It didn't seem to come from an electronic device, you know? It seemed alive. As if it had been made to provoke me, to scare me on purpose. That sweet smell wouldn't leave my head either. It stayed in the upholstery of the bench for days, even after I cleaned it all up. A smell that I've never smelled anywhere else again, and honestly, I hope I never do again. The strangest thing is that after that night I never saw or heard anything like it again. I didn't have nightmares, I didn't have visions. It was like it just happened and was over, out of nowhere. No explanation. As if I had been chosen to witness it for some reason I will never understand. Sometimes I wonder if I ended up in that place by chance or if it was meant to be. If I had gone straight ahead without stopping, would it have happened differently? I don't know. All I know is that since then, every time I pass through that area, I avoid even looking to the sides. And I always leave the cabin locked, even when I'm driving. Because you never know what might pop up in there. You have a specific route that I've done so many times I know every turn by heart. It goes from Tulsa to a factory in Amarillo, and I usually take this route every Monday very early, around 4 or 5 in the morning, to avoid the heat of the day. Nothing out of the ordinary has ever happened on this route. It's straight, quiet, and almost always deserted in the early hours of the morning. That's why it was so strange to see that house there. A house that, with absolute certainty, had never been in that place before. It wasn't a new cabin, nor was it a building in progress. It was an old house, the kind that looks like it came straight out of a period film. And the worst part, it was lit from inside, as if someone was awake at that time. I drove past it slowly, trying to understand what I was seeing. It was made of dark wood, with a wide porch, surrounded by a half-broken white fence. The windows were lit with a weak, but cozy, yellowish light. I didn't see any cars nearby, no movement inside. But something about that image bothered me deeply. It didn't make sense. I would have noticed a house like that before. That land was pure open field, with nothing but a few bushes and low trees. I stopped the truck on the shoulder about 100 meters ahead and stared in the rearview mirror. It was itching inside me. I can't explain it. As if I had seen that house somewhere before, even though I knew it was impossible. I don't know what the hell was going through my head, but I decided to walk back. I wanted to get a closer look. Maybe it was some historic house, or some resident who had renovated it and turned on the lights too early. I grabbed my flashlight, left the hazard lights on, and walked through the damp grass on the side of the road. As I got closer, the air seemed heavier. Not cold, but dense. A strange silence took over the place. No crickets, no wind, not the sound of the highway in the background. Just the sound of my footsteps on the grass. I climbed the 3 steps to the porch, which creaked in a very specific way, almost as if they were complaining about my presence there. I knocked on the door, which was ajar. I pushed slowly, expecting the typical smell of old wood and dust, but nothing. No smell. Just the sound of the door creaking, and that yellowish light coming from the end of the hallway. The house seemed empty, but alive at the same time. I went in. The furniture was old, like from the 50s, everything was too clean, too tidy. And that's when I saw the first thing that made me freeze, a picture frame on the fireplace, with a photo of me. Not a generic photo. It was a picture of me, sitting in my truck, taken from outside, as if someone had followed me. I looked around more. There were more portraits. On top of the bookshelf, on the walls, on the sideboard in the entrance hall. All of me. Some that I didn't even remember could exist. My heart started beating so hard I could hear it in my head. I walked slowly around the room, looking at each frame. The photos didn't look like montages, they were printed, old, in black and white or with that sepia tone, as if they were decades old. Some showed things that gave me goosebumps, me sleeping in the cab of the truck, me filling up at gas stations I recognized, me sitting on a park bench using my cell phone. None of these photos had been taken by me. It was as if someone had followed me for years and built up an entire collection. I went back to the door, wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. But when I pulled the handle, it wouldn't open. I turned it again. I jammed it. I forced it. Nothing. I tried not to panic. I walked over to the nearest window and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge either. It was like it was sealed shut from the inside. I started hearing a sound coming from upstairs. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Like someone was walking barefoot across an old wooden floor. I froze, staring at the stairs. I hadn't seen any stairs when I'd come in. But now they were there, to my left, going up to the second floor. I grabbed my phone to try to call someone, anyone, but the screen was black. Dead. Even though the battery was full when I got out of the truck. The footsteps stopped. Total silence again. I started walking towards the front door once more, but before I got there, I saw more photos, this time, scattered on the floor. As if someone had knocked it over on purpose. I bent down to pick one up and my stomach turned. It was a photo of me, taken at that very moment, inside that room. Me wearing the same clothes, in the same position. It was impossible. I turned my face instinctively, as if expecting to see someone with a camera behind me. But there was nothing. Just the house. Just that stuffy air. And that yellowish light that now seemed weaker, almost dying. Out of nowhere, the lights started flashing. One, then another. The sound of footsteps returned, now descending slowly. And I did what anyone would do, I ran. I tried to break the door down with my shoulder, I tried to break the window with a vase from the shelf, but it was like hitting concrete. The walls did not respond, did not vibrate. Nothing gave way. I felt like I wasn't alone there anymore. The presence was real, dense, suffocating. And, in a last impulse of despair, I closed my eyes and began to scream, asking for help. When I opened my eyes again, I was outside the house. Standing in the middle of the road. With the truck stopped on the other side. And the house was gone. I stood there, unable to move, breathing as if I had run a marathon. The sky was still dark, the road was deserted, and the only thing that could be heard was the sound of my truck's engine still running. I looked to the side, to the place where the house should be, and all I saw was grass and a few trees. No sign that anything had ever been there. No footprints, no structure, nothing. I staggered across the road, got into the cabin, and slammed the door shut. Only later did I realize that my hands were covered in dirt, as if I had been crawling or holding on to something. But I didn't remember any of that. I kept driving, not thinking straight, just wanting to get out of that area as quickly as possible. I arrived in Amarillo earlier than expected, dropped off the cargo at the depot, and went straight to a cheap motel. I slept with the lights on, sitting on the edge of the bed, cell phone in hand, as if I was waiting for something to happen again. But nothing happened. In the following days, I tried to find any record of that house, on Google Maps, on forums, I even asked in groups of drivers. No one knew anything. No trace, no abandoned building on that road. It was as if I had entered another place. One that only appeared to me. 2 weeks later, I found a photo in my backpack, at the bottom of one of the compartments. It was one of those I had seen in the house, me sleeping, with my head resting against the truck window. I don't remember taking it. I showed it to my wife, who asked who had taken it, but I couldn't tell her. Ever since then, I've had this constant feeling that someone is watching me. I've thought about throwing the photo away, but something stops me. I have this feeling that if I get rid of it, maybe this thing will come back. As if it were a reminder that the house existed, even if no one believes me. The craziest thing of all is that, after that day, I've never been able to drive down that stretch of road again. No matter how many times I try, I always miss the turn, or take a detour without realizing it. As if the road had changed. As if it had just appeared to me and now doesn't want to be found anymore. To this day, every time I wake up in the middle of the night in the truck, I look out the window just to make sure I'm not standing in front of that porch again. And even after all this time, I still keep expecting to see my face somewhere it shouldn't be. This was one of the stories that made me stop driving at night for a long time. And I've always been the kind of skeptical driver who laughed at other people's stories at roadside stops. But there are things you only understand when you're driving. This happened in 2019, somewhere between Wichita and Garden City, Kansas. It's a region I already knew well, half empty, with few cities along the way, long straights and a lot of silence. That night I was making a simple dry cargo transport, without rushing. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I was wide awake, listening to the radio, on a quiet road. Until I saw the tracks. At first I thought I had taken the wrong path, because I never remember crossing trails there. But they were there, clearly visible on the road. The signage was old, worn, and even had one of those wooden gates, but raised, as if it were broken or no longer in use. I slowed down, a little confused, because I really didn't remember that. And I have a good memory for this kind of thing. I drove over it slowly, listening to the squeak of the wheels on the wooden slats. Everything seemed out of time, as if it had stopped there decades ago. About 300 meters later, I stopped the truck on the shoulder. Something didn't add up. I grabbed my cell phone and went straight to the map. No tracks. No railroad tracks registered there. No old markings, nothing. It didn't exist in the records. I decided to walk back, with the flashlight, just to make sure I wasn't traveling. When I got close to the tracks again, the atmosphere was strange. The air was still, heavy, and I started to hear a sound that made my blood run cold, the noise of a train. At first faint, then louder. The whistle, the tracks vibrating slightly, as if something huge was approaching. But there was nothing. I looked both ways and saw nothing but darkness. No light in the distance, no beams coming toward me. Only the sound grew louder. The ground began to vibrate ever so slightly beneath my feet, as if a train were about to pass, but the tracks were clearly old, overgrown with weeds in some places. I ran to the side of the road, terrified, expecting to see the train appear at any moment. But it never came. The sound passed through me, as if it had crossed space without needing to be there. The noise grew fainter until it disappeared completely. And I stood there, alone, trembling, with the feeling that something had passed through me, and moved on. I got back into the truck, still a little dazed, trying to process what had happened. I closed the door and stood there with my hands on the steering wheel, unable to turn the key. The radio was silent, my cell phone still had no signal. It all seemed like a forgotten place, out of time, as if I had crossed some dead spot on the road. I started the engine and drove slowly, looking in the rearview mirror every 5 seconds, as if I expected to see something coming behind me. But the road was always the same, straight, deserted, silent. For a moment, I even thought about turning around, going back to see if the tracks were still there, but something inside me told me not to do that. About 20 minutes later, I stopped at a gas station in a small town called Cimarron. It's one of the few places in the area with decent coffee and clean bathrooms. I walked in, still a bit dazed, and mentioned to the cashier that I had come across some old railroad tracks nearby. The guy stared at me for a while, silent, and then said, "Did you see them too?" I froze. I asked him what he meant by that, and he said that drivers had come by there before, talking about these railroad tracks that appear out of nowhere in the middle of the road. Always in the middle of the night. And the strangest thing was that no one could ever find them again the next day. I got back into the truck with a heavy feeling in my chest. It wasn't just in my head. Others had seen it. Others had felt it. I spent the rest of the trip trying not to think about it, but every time the truck shook a little or made any unusual noise, I remembered the sound of the train. It wasn't a normal sound. It was old, deep, and very metallic, like the steam-powered trains of decades ago. It didn't make any sense for such a train to be in that region, at that time. And the worst part is that when I looked up railroad records from the area later, I discovered that yes, there had been a train line there. But it had been decommissioned in 1967. Since then, every driver I meet at the stops who says they're going to do that stretch, I ask them. Few have heard of it, but those who have, always say the same thing: the ghost tracks. Some say they saw lights. Others say they heard the train and, when they tried to get out of the truck, the doors were locked. One guy told me that when the tracks appear, it's like time changes, slows down. And that made me even more puzzled, because that night, I arrived at my destination almost an hour later than expected, and without having made any long stops other than the one at the gas station. After that trip, I tried to avoid that stretch of highway for quite some time. I would rather take a bigger detour than risk crossing the trails again. But inevitably, a few weeks later, I had to go through there again, this time during the day. It was sunny, traffic was light. And there was nothing. No trace, no structure, no sign that anything was ever there. The place I remember stopping was the same, only much cleaner. Not even the tire marks I left that night were on the asphalt. It was as if everything had been erased. One thing caught my attention: every time I pass by there, the truck's GPS fails. The screen freezes, or shows me in a spot completely off the road, in the middle of the woods. I thought it was a coincidence the first few times, but it always happens in the same stretch. Once, I tried to record a video of myself passing by there, to show the error on the map, but the result was bizarre. When I went to watch the recording, the video was all distorted, the audio was cutting out, and the image looked old, as if it had been recorded with old equipment. It didn't even look like my cell phone. I showed it to two friends and they were both visibly uncomfortable. After that, I decided to stop trying to record anything. I felt like it was warning me, don't mess with that. I stopped talking about the subject, only with people I trusted. But even trying to forget, there is one thing that still haunts me. The sound of that train. It wasn't just a noise. It was a presence. As if he were alive, aware of me. As if he knew I was there. And the strangest thing was the silence afterwards. A silence so absolute that it felt heavy, as if the world had stopped for a few seconds. This haunts me to this day. I don't try to understand anymore. I don't look for answers. I just know that in certain parts of Kansas, there's something that shouldn't be there. Something ancient, out of time. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I see the empty horizon, I hear it again. Far away. A whistle, barely audible, that's getting closer. But I don't stop anymore. Ever again. Because I have the feeling that if I stop, this time I won't get out. And the train finally takes me. There's a guy who shows up at practically every night stop I make. No matter the state, the time, or the distance between stops, he's always there. I'm not just saying this, I mean it. Since the end of 2020, I started noticing this pattern. At first I thought it was a coincidence. There are a lot of people like that in the world, right? But over time, I started noticing the details. The same worn-out brown jacket, the same worn-out shoes with crooked soles, the same posture, the same deep, somewhat lost look in his eyes. He's never eating, never sleeping, never busy. He's just waiting. I clearly remember the first time I really noticed him. I was at a gas station in Nevada, around 2 a.m. I sat down to eat a quick snack, and he was in the corner, looking out the window. I thought he was just another road-weary guy. But that same week, I saw him again, in Utah. Same clothes, same place, in the corner, looking out. I started to feel uneasy. I said hi the third time I saw him, at a stop in Arizona. He responded with a slight wave, never taking his eyes off of space. I watched. He had nothing in his hands. No backpack, no cell phone, no book. It was as if he was waiting for something, or someone. The strangest thing is that no one ever seemed to notice him. I would arrive, eat, fill up, go back to the truck, and there he was. Sitting on the same bench, in the same kind of corner, always motionless. I started testing him. I stopped at different times, at different gas stations, and in states far apart. And he was still there. Sometimes outside, near the gas pumps. Sometimes near the entrance to the bathroom. One time, I arrived at a completely empty, almost abandoned place, and there he was, leaning against a rusty pillar, with his eyes open. I never saw him blink. I asked a gas station attendant in Colorado Springs if he knew the guy. He laughed and said that everyone has seen him around there, but no one knows who he is. They say he's been waiting for someone for decades, he said. That's all. From then on, I started to observe him more. I recorded videos, took discrete photos, but in all of them, he comes out blurry. As if the camera couldn't capture him properly. I've changed cameras, angles, distances. The result is always the same. Blurry, distorted, as if he were out of focus, even when the rest of the image is perfect. There was one night in New Mexico when I decided to confront him for real. It was a small, run-down gas station, and it was just the two of us inside. I sat down at the table next to him and asked him point blank, "You're always here, right?" He turned slowly, as if he'd heard me the whole time, and said, "I'm waiting." His voice was low, a little hoarse, but very clear. I asked him who he was waiting for. He just smiled, a strange, sad smile. He knows. That was it. That left me cold. It was like he'd answered something much bigger than it seemed. I got up and left. I couldn't finish my lunch. After that, I stopped trying to talk to him. But he kept showing up. Some places he'd be outside, staring at the sky. Other times he'd be sitting on the curb, staring into space. One time I stopped at a gas station in Idaho and he was standing next to my truck. When I got out of the cab, he was already farther away, leaning against a sign. I swear he moved in a second. I never saw him walk, I never saw him arrive or leave. He's just there. Always. A friend of mine, Jace, said he saw an identical man in Oregon. I gave him a description, and he went white. He said he'd seen the guy twice, at 2 different gas stations, in the same day. What bothers me the most is that every time he shows up, something strange happens to me afterwards. I've had electrical failures in the cabin, GPS freezing, the radio playing voices I don't understand. Sometimes I feel like he left a piece of himself inside the truck. As if I took a bit of that, waiting, with me. A feeling that something is about to happen, but it never does. It just stays there, hovering, hanging over me like a cloud that won't let go. And at every stop, even when I don't see him, I keep waiting to see him. Because now he's part of the road. As if he were an invisible milestone along the way. One day, early in the morning on I-40, I stopped at a place to get coffee, and he was at the entrance. This time, he spoke before me. He said, "It's getting close." That was it. The voice was the same. Only now he was looking straight at me, not at nothing. I didn't know what to say. I went in, bought the coffee, and when I came back, he was gone. And for the first time, I felt real fear. Not fear of him, fear of what that meant. Who was getting close? What did he know? Why me? I never got an answer. And the worst part is, he didn't disappear. He kept showing up. Only now, he was looking at me. Always. Ever since that night he spoke to me, everything has changed. I can no longer ignore his presence. Before, he was just a constant shadow, a piece out of place. Now, he stares at me. And sometimes I see him before I even get to the stop. Like that time in Texas, I was still driving down the hill on the highway, with the gas station looming in the distance, and there he was. Small in the landscape, but perfectly still, already waiting for me. It's as if he knows exactly where I'm going to stop, the route I'm going to take. I've tried completely changing my route, taking detours, taking back roads. He's always at the end of the road. Another detail I started to understand: he never blinks. Never yawns. It never moves involuntarily. Always staring, with his eyes wide open, as if he hadn't slept in years. And it haunts me because after he started looking directly at me, I stopped sleeping properly too. I always wake up at 3:13 a.m., wherever I am. Always with the feeling that there is someone standing outside the truck. I've gotten up, looked, checked, but there's never anything. Still, I know. I feel. He's there. Maybe not in the physical, but in some other layer of the thing. Observing. Waiting. I wonder who this person he's waiting for is. And why he told me he's getting closer. Could it be me? Could someone like him have chosen me? I've started to save stories from other truck drivers who've seen this same man, and the story is almost always the same. The difference is that most of them say he never said anything. Never looked. He just stood there. I'm the only one who's heard a whole sentence. And that eats away at me inside. Because it means that, somehow, I've connected with him. And the feeling I have is that when he stops showing up, it's because the time has come. These days, I drive around with the cab locked even during the day. I stop as little as possible. I sleep badly. I eat badly. I keep one eye on the road and the other on the reflection in the mirror. And the weirdest thing is that sometimes I think I see him in other places. Reflected in shop windows, in the shadow of a passing truck, on the TV in a break room. As if he had gone beyond the stopover space. As if he were now following me. The man who never sleeps is always there. And maybe, in the end, it is I who is being waited for. I've driven through almost every state in the country, but it was in Utah that I had the strangest experience of my entire life. It was in 2021, on a nighttime route that I'd driven dozens of times before, between Salina and Delta. A straight stretch, without much traffic, flanked by open fields and some low hills in the distance. I was driving a light truck, carrying only some industrial equipment, and the weather was dry, the sky was clear. Everything seemed normal until, without any warning, the sound simply disappeared. And I mean all the sounds, not just the radio or the engine. Everything. The world went silent from one moment to the next. At first I thought the engine had died. I took my foot off the accelerator and looked at the dashboard. Everything was working normally. The hands, the rotation, the speedometer. But I didn't hear anything else. Not the sound of the wind hitting the windshield, not the tires on the asphalt, not my own body. And that was the most bizarre thing. I was breathing, but I couldn't hear the breathing. I blinked hard, ran my hand over my ears, started tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. Nothing. An absolute, suffocating silence, as if the world had been placed inside a bubble. And the strange thing is that I didn't feel afraid. I felt a kind of emptiness that cannot be explained. A silence that seemed older than anything. I drove for a few more minutes, trying to stay calm. I looked at the GPS and it would freeze every now and then, as if the truck had stopped. The road was exactly the same, the scenery didn't change. It was as if I was driving in a loop. A field on the right, a fence on the left, the same slight curve that never ended. I started to realize that I had been on this stretch for too long. Much longer than I should have. But it was still night. The sky didn't change, the clock on the dashboard seemed frozen. I looked at my phone, no signal. It didn't even show the time anymore. Just the black screen, as if it had been reset. That was when I saw something even stranger. On the side of the road, at a point where I'm absolutely certain nothing had ever been there, a light pole appeared. Tall, old, with the light on. But the pole was bent, crooked towards the road, as if it were about to fall. I passed it slowly, and as soon as I left it behind, the sounds all came back at once, as if someone had turned off the mute. Engine, wind, tires, even my own sigh of relief. I looked at my watch and it was almost 6 in the morning. When I entered this stretch, it was a little after 3 a.m. I lost almost 3 hours, and I swear that, for me, it had been no more than 15 minutes. I stopped the truck on the shoulder of the road right after I left that section. I needed to breathe, to understand what had just happened. My head felt heavy, not like fatigue, but like I had been underwater for a long time. I picked up my cell phone again, but it still had no signal. I stood there for a few minutes, looking in the rearview mirror, waiting to see something, anything, coming from the direction I had come from. But the road was empty, motionless. I tried to remember everything I had thought during that silence, but it was as if my mind had been turned off too. No clear thoughts, no daydreams. Just the act of driving, automatically, in absolute emptiness. I arrived late at my destination and tried to tell the unloading manager what had happened. He just laughed and said that those roads really do eat up time. But I could see in his eyes that he understood. As if he had already been through something similar and didn't want to talk about it. I started asking around in groups of drivers, and little by little I discovered similar stories. People who had gone through a stretch where everything went silent. People who had lost hours and didn't realize it. One guy said that he had entered that silence when the sky was still dark and left when the sun was already high, but the truck's clock only showed 20 minutes of time. Since then, I have started marking on my personal map where this happens. The spot in Utah was the first, but then I lived somewhere similar near Flagstaff and most recently in Wyoming. Always at night. Always with that same feeling of being out of time. And always the same way, a silence that is not just the absence of sound, but a presence. As if the silence was alive and watching me. I've tried recording when I feel like it's about to happen again, but the audio always fails. The microphone doesn't pick up anything, just static noise, as if the recording was being blocked. What bothers me the most is what happens in the following days. I feel like I'm out of place, as if I've returned to the world a little late. I get confused about dates and times, and sometimes I forget the route I take every day. I've even arrived at a familiar gas station and it's different. They've changed the colors, the layout, even the attendants' uniforms. But they say everything is the same. It's as if I've returned to a place that's almost identical, but with minor flaws. And whenever this happens, I ask myself, did I really go off track? Or did I get stuck somewhere else? I started to notice little details that seemed out of place. Like signs with words changed, posts that I was sure weren't there before, and even a kind of light buzzing that stays in my ears for days after passing through these stretches. I've already been to the doctor, had hearing tests, everything was normal. But the buzzing comes back every time I enter one of those quiet zones. It stays there, constant, like a reminder. As if something was still trying to maintain contact. And the scariest thing? Sometimes it changes frequency, as if it is trying to form a word. But it never forms. I once told an old trucker about this at a rest stop in Montana. He looked at me and said he knew these places. They're not faults in time or natural phenomena. He called them drop zones. He said they're like crevices, pockets where the world isn't whole. Where the rules stop working. And if you go too far into them, you end up getting stuck. I didn't understand what he meant by that at the time, but now I'm afraid I'm starting to understand. Because every time I come back from one of these places, I feel like something was left there. Or worse, something came with me. There was a night 2 weeks ago when I was sleeping in my truck at a gas station in Oregon when I woke up and everything was silent again. I was in the cab, but I couldn't hear anything. Not the engine off, not the roar of the highway in the background. I looked out the window and I swear I saw the road from the Utah stretch, that same curve, that same bent utility pole. But I wasn't in Utah. I was 1,000 miles away. I blinked, shook my head, and when I looked back, everything was back to normal. But ever since that day, I've known that no matter where I am, those places can reach me. Today, I avoid driving at night. I take the longest, least efficient routes, but I stay away from those points marked on my map. Still, I know that there is no way to escape forever. Because those zones are no longer just on the road. They are in my mind. In my dreams. In the spaces between one blink and the next. And the question that torments me the most is, how many times have I entered and not realized? How many times will I still enter and not be able to get out? Because in the absolute silence, in the emptiness of the road, it is not only the sound that disappears. It is you.